Hello and welcome to our episode of FinTech Focus TV with me, Toby. Today I am very excited to welcome into the studio Paul from Hotwire. Paul, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Very good indeed. Listen, I had a good chat to you beforehand here, and this is an area which I'm fascinated by. I think it's a really important space that you guys fill into it, telling the stories, bringing companies to life, the comms, the brand, the marketing, the PR, everything else in between. It's such an underestimated and important part, I think, of the whole fintech ecosphere. You've been in there for a fair while in various different forms, and we're going to talk through a little bit about that. We're going to talk about the sort of onset of AI. We're going to be talking a little bit about what's happening in the space, full stop, how companies can approach this sort of stuff. I'm thoroughly excited about talking it through with you. But I always ask people to start with a little bit of an intro. So, Paul, tell us a little bit about your history and about Hotwire.
Okay, well, I've been in comms and marketing for over 20 years now, and really got into fintech probably the last 15 years.
Yep. Exciting times of fintech.
Yeah, started working with some of those disruptors, and then they've now gone to bigger ones. So like I worked with TransferWise at the very beginning. Yeah. And now look at it where it is now as Wise. And I've been mainly focused on comms, but looking about solving problems for my clients. Yeah. And whether that is messaging, training, developing content, really getting that strategy out there for them and executing on it. I've worked with many different brands within the fintech space, so working with some of those startups, helping them to grow, that mid-size where they're going through challenges, and then also some of those big global fintechs such as Broadridge, etc. So worked with many different advisors in the last few years. At Hotwire, I'm a senior vice president, global head of fintech, and I'm here to enhance the fintech practice globally, develop new products, capabilities for the agency. Hotwire's been going for 25 years, very focused on tech. It's a global consultancy, and we're branching out into more fintech and consumer tech. And my role is really to enhance that and build on all the experience I've had over the last few years and develop more.
Lead the charge.
Hopefully, yes.
So tell us a little bit about, fintech itself is such a broad world, isn't it? As we were talking about beforehand, from B2C through to B2C. There's lots of different areas and umbrellas of it. And for me, it's always spanned from everywhere from startups and payments, and through that you can put digital assets and crypto into it. You can put capital markets in there as well. Where do you sit in that fintech ecosystem, covering everything by the sound of it as well?
Yeah, covering everything. I think the biggest market at the moment and the biggest disruption is around payments. Yeah. But we're also seeing a lot from reg tech and wealth tech.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I would say, being at Money 2020 this year, it's all payments. Yeah, it's all payments. A lot more crypto is coming back again, and stable coins, etc. So yeah, it's a real range. So there's nothing really we don't touch, because it's fintech and working with all those different sizes. So we get a startup that's looking to branch out, into a new market, or we've got that big player who's like, how do we communicate better, or manage their risk in a better way? Yeah. Because very different challenges, very different opportunities for the different sizes of fintechs. But I love it all. I've done, like I said, reg tech, but I've always done property tech, green tech. I mean, it covers a lot of things within the fintech ecosphere.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's talk a little bit about, look, we've seen a number of companies in this area get funding, and there's a lot of, sort of seed, pre-seed, there's Series A, B, et cetera, and all of those sort of journeys require a different sort of messaging. Yeah. But I want to focus on that sort of growth and growing businesses at that sort of stage. And as companies sort of become more global and try different things, there's a lot of pitfalls that can come through in that sort of thing as people sort of struggle, I think, from owner-led business, founder-led businesses, and particularly where you've got people that have come from multiple different backgrounds. On this show, I've loved speaking to a whole variety of people from product backgrounds, people from tech backgrounds, people from business backgrounds, sales backgrounds, legal backgrounds. There's a lot of different types of founder. And within those founders, there are people there who are more natural in terms of how they market and actually probably more focused on that side of things and do it brilliantly. Yeah. And there's some companies where you can see that it's almost like an irrelevance or annoyance to them until it's not, and they recognise they have to move themselves further forward and adapt to that sort of world. And I think that can be quite a tricky sort of place sometimes for them to be thinking creatively when actually the sort of world that they're sat in isn't a particularly creative world. It's a very sort of process and technical based world, and that sort of never the twain shall meet can be quite a difficult void to fill within it, which is why I think you become so important in that whole sort of journey. So when you're sat there and you're talking to companies on that growth journey, talk us through some of the nuances they need to look out for, some of the issues that they're facing, and how you help with that.
Well, the first thing is they've come to us, which is a good start, because I think there's a lot of entrepreneurs who have great ideas.
Does it come to you, or is it outreach?
A bit of both. Yeah, I think it's just that network, that community of people, and being in the industry for a while now, it's knowing people and they all move, etc. But I think there's a lot of entrepreneurs who've got a great idea and they bring that to market, but they know very little about marketing and comms and how to reach their audience.
Yeah.
And I think it takes a really good leader to then go, I'm very good at this, but I need experts.
Yeah.
Hence why that conversation then comes together. And we'll ask the right questions. What is their business objectives? What are their comms objectives? What are they wanting to do in the next 6 months, 12 months? And we try and support them in different ways. Sometimes it's about just building a strategy and let them execute it on. Sometimes it's just consultancy advice. It's just telling them, you're not ready. You need to do this first. Do you understand your audience? So we do a lot of digging and ask a lot of questions. Yeah. Because that's really important. Sometimes that can cut through. Yeah. Because if you ask a startup, they're like, oh, we want to launch next year, and I'm like, okay, what's your audience? What's your target? What's it? And they suddenly go, don't know. And, who's backing? And are they actually solving a problem? Yeah. I've worked with a lot of startups at the beginning where they sort of have an idea, which is good, but how do you compare to others? What is your USP? Can you really sell that to me? Is there an audience for it? Are you looking to make a quick buck? Or is it something long-term that you're actually disrupting the industry? So then once they are on board with a comms or, marketing agency, it's really talking through what are the key things they need to think about. And I think it's like, one, thinking about the market as a whole. We get a lot of fintechs who say, we're one of a kind, and they might well be. But at the same time, there's a lot of fintechs in the space, and it's really thinking about how you differentiate yourself. And that could be through the messaging, really making sure you've got core messaging for all the spokespeople across the website. There's consistency. Yeah. And thinking about, do you have the right content out there? Are you saying the right message? Are you actually talking to your customer? Yeah. Rather than, is this an internal message? We love it internally, but externally no one understands what you're actually trying to sell or do. And then if they're looking to do some outreach to media, it's making sure, are we targeting the right journalists, the right publications that are going to be read by people? Yeah. Because people say, I want to be in the FT, which is great, and obviously we can do that. But if you're a supply chain fintech that's just started, should you be not talking to more of the tech publications to get your message across? Yeah. Or if you're a payments provider, shouldn't you be looking at some of those payment titles? Like the FinExtras of the world. Should you be talking to them, because who's reading them are the payment head of payments in the different businesses. Absolutely. FT is a lovely thing, but with the likes of the top tier, you get one hit, one chance. So don't use that as your first go. Make sure you test it with other trade publications, that you get the message across there. Yeah. Because the FT are super busy, the Wall Street Journal, publications like that.
And so much space.
Yeah, and it's like you don't want to have a meeting with them and then you haven't got your story right. Yeah. So we're there to help craft that narrative, get that point of view. We do test runs and training to sort of go, I'm a journalist, why is this important? Why are you different? What's the regulator saying about you? And push the boundaries. Yeah. And some of those uncomfortable questions, but by doing that, then they have an answer. Yeah. Because we say to all our clients, you must have an answer for everything. In our world, don't say no comment. It's really about, it's your business, you're the experts, you've created this. Yeah. So you should have an answer for it. Yeah. And then we think about how that feeds down into their content and whether they're doing videos, podcasts, etc. What is the message that's getting across there? Yeah.
And consistency of that message.
Consistency, and of course then that feeds into the marketing side. What collateral are you sending out? What are you saying at events? What are you saying on a panel? Yeah. And also what are you saying across social media? Yeah. Because sometimes you look at companies and it's like, well, you said this on social media, but you're saying this in a press release, and you're saying this on your website. Yeah. Is making sure there's consistency, because journalists, analysts, even clients, customers, they'll be looking at all of this. And if they're confused, then that's not a good start. We want to break down all that confusion.
It's a really interesting point you say there, because when you talk about clients knowing stuff before they actually sort of engage with the brand, it's a very different world than it was 20 years ago. And I read something in a book by Dan Pink called To Sell is Human, and he talked about the world has moved from buyer beware to seller beware. And the whole concept of that is we're dealing with people there who know a lot more at the moment now about what they're buying than ever before. So the idea of this sort of salesperson who is a wine bar salesperson who can come in there and schmooze and do all that sort of stuff without having that sort of detailed knowledge and convince people through charm is a lot more difficult these days, because people are know the messaging and they know what they're dealing with. So to have that consistency, I think, is incredibly important.
Yeah, and it's cutting through the noise. There's so much noise and complexities out there, and and a lot of jargon, especially in financial services and FinTech.
Absolutely.
The jargon, the abbreviations, and people are just like, cut it down to me. So a lot of our clients as well, when they talk to them, it's sort of, this is the business talk, but how do you talk to your customer? If they're using that app or that piece of equipment, that technology, it's like, how do we talk to them? Breaking down that. And sometimes that can be tricky, because sometimes they're very complex topics. When you're talking about regulatory stuff, and navigating that, it's how do you break that through to make sure that people can understand it, but also trust in what you're doing.
Well, it's knowing that audience as well. I sat in on a session a couple of years ago which talked about the whole concept of the story brand. And I loved it being, for me, I'm quite visual, and I love the idea of it being sort of equated to the whole Disney Pixar story of once upon a time, then this came along, and then this is how the hero came through, and this is how you live happily ever after. And I think that sort of simple formula of saying, right, and you mentioned it before, sort of really understanding the pain points of the customer. My issue about this space, which I see a lot with companies that struggle a little bit, have that bottleneck of being able to really launch themselves further forward and win business, is they're so evangelical about their product and the tech that they don't actually think about whether it is a needed issue and how they address that issue with the consumer, the customer. And I think when you can get that story absolutely on point and recognise that story is different in different regions, in different areas, in different client sets sometimes, and actually spend that time listening and researching a little bit more, so you've got the awareness from the other side as well, that becomes a really important part of it. So how do you take companies on that sort of journey?
It's really thinking about what is the industry problem. What is the problem you're solving?
And this comes down to the USP, doesn't it? Because again, that USP doesn't necessarily have to be completely unique. It just has to be relevant to that.
Just what is the problem? What's the context? What's the problem you're solving? And where does this product fit in? But it's talking about the industry as a whole. You produce this, you've developed this product because of new regulation. Talk about what's important about that new regulation. How does it affect the customer? What are the benefits to them? What are the features they need to know? Because I think if you just sort of sell a product, everybody probably saying the same thing, it's the same sort of jargon. But it's cutting through that and making sure you really say something that's interesting, and always go back to that problem. And I think when I do a lot of media training with clients, straight away they want to sell the product and the name, and, and it's like, but what does it do? Does it save time? What does it do? Because that's what customers and clients are looking for. If you can say you can save them 10% of their time because this does this, that's amazing. If you're just talking about another product as part of a suite, it doesn't help anyone.
Do you know what? I'm really interested you said that, because I am. This may be somewhere around the 600 episode that we release of this show, so it's in and around there. It's rapidly enclosing onto it. And one of my favourite things over those 600 episodes is trying to link the sort of golden threads of the companies that do well, and actually what they're trying to do within that. So the founder piece I've spoken about. The other thing that I'm really fascinated about is what is the areas of problem that they're trying to solve, and what's the value that they add. And predominant things the sales effectively come through to me that I can see is part of it is cost reduction. So we're going to save you X by bringing our products in play. Part of it is, we're going to navigate this regulation that will in turn save you X from doing this. It might be we're going to increase productivity. I think there's only so much cost saving that people are recognising they can do. They need to see gains in terms of how people can reduce friction. All of these different things are as a sort of recipe for what people can do. And if you can get that story on point about how you can do all of those, and how your product improves efficiency, reduces friction, increases productivity, saves costs, increases velocity, all of those different things, we're going to be here quicker, efficient, bang, 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 all of that sort of stuff. that's absolutely a necessity of how you can create that and then keep that continuity of stuff all the way through. But I think it's also interesting in this space, and particularly over probably, you mentioned 15 years since you've been in the fintech space. I don't think we've ever seen more rapid evolution than the last 5. Yeah. 5 to 6, pretty much since COVID. And I think pre-COVID, if you look at fintech, one of the words that was ridiculed a little bit was pivot. So that was a word there which was a dirty word, and people thought, right, it means you've got your strategy wrong, it means you're there, it means you're failing, etc., etc. Right now, pivot is all about adaptability and recognizing that tech and things are changing quickly and regulations are changing quickly. Yeah. And I think that's quite a challenge for people when they're talking about their brand and messaging, to say, look, we're here and this is what we do, and actually now we're here and this is what we do, and then we're here and what we do, and how we can keep that sort of thing whilst maintaining that integrity. So give us a little bit of an insight into that. Yeah,
I mean, I've worked with fintechs of all different sizes, and I think, like you said, pivot was a dirty word. It meant, like you said, you haven't got it right. Yeah. But actually, as the market's changing so quickly, I think the fintechs that do really well are sort of stop. Yeah. Let's look at the strategy and let's pivot, let's change, let's adapt now. Yeah. And I've worked with some fintechs where they've got rid of their whole C-suite because it's just not right. They've decided not to enter a market because of political unrest or something's happened. They haven't launched a product because it's not quite right yet. They're looking at their audience again to make sure it's correct. And I think that just shows that they're really understanding their business and listening to the audience and understanding the market. Yeah. Because I think if you can just pause everything and go, okay, we were going to launch next month, but because of A, B, and C, we're not going to now. Yeah. Making sure, but communicating that in the right way. Mm-hmm. If you're doing it constantly, it might look a bit bad, but I think it's mainly thinking about being able to pivot and think about what next. Yeah. And sometimes it is just stepping back. And I think that really shows a good leader of a business to say, let's step back for a second, let's reevaluate, let's really understand what we're doing here. Yeah. And if we do want to go ahead, let's do it, but there's no harm in pausing. Yeah. And I think with a lot of these fintechs, I think they're used to it now. Like you said, over the last 5 years, every 6 months is a change. Like some of the fintechs I work, we don't do 12-month plans, it's sort of 3 months, quarterly plans, because things change so much.
And we'll come on to AI in a minute, but that's only accelerated that, hasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think with so much happening in the fintech space at the moment in terms of IPOs and acquisitions, etc., things are constantly changing. Yeah. And it's sort of like, so I think if you stick to 3 months, gone are the days where you do the 18-month plan.
Yeah, yeah.
That's way
3 years.
That's way gone. I mean, I think with some of the bigger fintechs, they still very much do a 3-year strategy plan. Yeah, yeah. But that could be quite out of date within 6 months.
Absolutely.
So it's maybe have that big plan, but also thinking you're going to have to keep reiterating and changing over that time. And I think now, if you're more aware of that, the better it is.
Well, I think they're used to it in the the very DNA of technology is about iteration, isn't it? Yeah. An iterative improvement and iterative design. And actually, when you think about it on a macro basis or a comms basis or a marketing basis, all of those things sort of come into the same the same bucket. Let's talk. I mean, I mentioned story brand before, right? And a concept which I think people don't necessarily think of it. They've got to think about, right, if they're the hero of the story, what's the persona of the brand persona of who they're talking to? Who's their ideal thing? We spoke beforehand about putting 100 people in a room. If you could be giving that message, what would that message be, and what would you want them to be hearing from it? In the same sort of view of this, and talking to people about how they should be thinking about telling their story, what are some of the things that you'd be advising people in that sort of area?
I think it's understand who you're talking to, and I think be authentic.
And when you talk about understanding who you're talking to, I think people sometimes say, well, I know it, I've been in the space, etc., but there's a lot more to it than that. So what does it actually mean to know who you're talking to?
I mean, I think it's understanding how they consume information, the age group, and the background about them, the demographics, etc. And I think that's really important. And what are their pain points? What are their challenges?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because if you understand what their challenges are, like you said, talk their language as well. Yeah. If they're talking, and I'm not saying that we don't have abbreviations and lots of jargon, but if they understand it, that's fine. But also think about, if your audience don't understand that, do they understand the regulatory stuff? Do they understand how that's going to actually affect them and their company? You have to break it down. Yeah. And I think that's really important. Even though, my clients are the experts in that space, the hardest thing is really dumbing it down. Yeah. so everybody can understand it.
Yeah.
Because there's so much going out there. I mean, when I started working in financial services, I just was so confused and lost with the amount of abbreviations and regulations. And
I'm 25 years in, I'm the same.
it's, you know, and it keeps changing. But I think it's how do you break that down so, you know, my mum can understand it, or someone on the street just goes, oh, I totally get it.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. So I think it's knowing your audience, making sure that you break it down, but also test that content, test that messaging, and see if it works.
Yeah.
You know, and that's why, again, it's like pivoting, changing, because you might think you've got the right message, you go out,
sort of stuff, and
then you go, no one's responding, or people are still confused.
Yeah.
And I think nowadays, simplified, breaking down that complexity is really key, because there's so much going on, and we're consuming news in so many different ways, 24/7.
Yeah.
It's just making sure that sometimes it's simple. Simple is the best.
I want to sit there and talk from the standpoint of some of the founders that I've spoken to in this space, and again, I'm talking about the more sort of militant and set in their ways founders, and probably from a very strong technical background. And I've seen that they think that marketing is gloss as opposed to the sort of impact it can have. Talk to us about some of the the genuine impacts that this space can have, that a strong marketing, comms, PR strategy can have on the acceleration of the business.
I mean, you know, it helps build your reputation and grow those relationships that you need, and also it can drive revenue.
Yeah.
You know, it always upsets me when, you know,
sales and marketing working in partnership is so important.
And they should, you know, first issue sometimes is when they don't work together.
Yeah.
When sales, marketing, and a company don't work together and they're siloed.
Yeah.
But there's so much opportunity there, and I think if you get the right message out there, you can grow your business.
Yeah.
So when they cut marketing because they sort of think it is glossy, it's just like, that's the first mistake.
Yeah.
You know, I remember reading something years ago. You know, if you're shouting louder in times of hardship, people remember you in hardship, and then in also the good time.
Well, wasn't this a really interesting part of COVID? And what I mean by that is that I think for the first time, in a long, possibly ever, marketing really came to the fore during COVID, and it became the superhero of businesses, because people recognised that when salespeople couldn't go to events and be shaking hands and doing that, when they couldn't get access and go out and meet people, etc., having a really strong brand accelerated businesses. And there are companies there that I think did a phenomenal job with their marketing teams that I know helped them to gain that funding, to gain those customer base, to eat market share, to stand out, to stop selling to people but start adding value to it all in that sort of area, and really understand them. And I can literally physically see the campaigns that stick in my head from that sort of phase. Yeah. And when people double down on adding value through marketing, their brands and their businesses suddenly shot further forward dramatically quickly as well. And I think that sort of opened the mind to people. Obviously there's a lot of things. I'm not saying marketing was not seen as valuable beforehand, but I think it really put it in the forefront, and it's stayed there, and it's been elevated a lot more subsequently. And I talk a lot about the C-suite and the changing face of the C-suite over over the last 25 years or so. When I first came into the industry, the C-suite was effectively a CEO and maybe a CFO and a couple of other people around it. There wasn't really CTOs at that sort of stage. There was a lot of IT directors that were sat there, and IT was very much a cost center. You had sales leadership, and you might see a CRO in there. But we've seen now the CPO, and I think this ever increasing role of the CMO. Mm-hmm. And alongside that, people who've got working from the specialist agencies within the field, who aren't sort of generic but can sit there and say, right, we've got this sort of focus on tech, or this focus you have for 15 years in fintech, really knowing the marketplace inside out, adding that extra value in terms of what's happening, helping people be the Sherpa on their journey to help them move that further forward. And if you think about where investors, VCs, PE, see the significance of putting money behind businesses that've got that brand and the value of the brand that does on a multiplier, it suddenly becomes a really, really important part of it. Yeah,
and so you mentioned the VCs, a lot of these fintechs are looking for funding.
Absolutely.
And so they need marketing. Yeah. They need the marketing, they need the comms behind them. Yeah. So when you cut that off, then no one knows about you. It's just making sure. And the thing is with marketing, obviously you can do the return on investment, look at, what are the results, what are you achieving? And
Absolutely.
You can monitor that and adapt and change.
Yeah.
Comms is always slightly difficult to, how you look at the results.
Yeah.
But, if your competitors are out there talking about the industry as a whole, you need to be part of that conversation.
Exactly, yeah.
And if you're quiet, then you could be shelved or moved across. And I think after COVID, when people started going back to events, there were a few companies I know that were like, we're not going to go to these events anymore because they're not valuable.
Yeah.
But of course, people are going to those events going, where is X FinTech?
Exactly,
where it,
you suddenly become very irrelevant on those sort of things.
And it can happen really quickly.
Yeah.
I think because there's more fintechs entering the market, if you're not doing enough shouting about, so I think it's keeping that message going, and marketing and comms is so important in terms of that.
Well, when you talk about it being a saturated market in various sense, and the competition never being higher with a more fragmented piece. It used to be enterprise technology, and that's how how people would buy their systems, etc. Now, when you're talking about interoperability, there's a whole suite of Frankenstein monster of tech that comes in. So everyone's got a space within that, but they've got to be really clear about who they're going and why they where the value comes in. I think that becomes an even more important part of it.
Yeah.
But it gets, if we're talking about that whole story brand, and we're talking about the sort of enemy on the horizon, the sort of the hidden threat, there's this extraordinary paradox at the moment that both the threat and the opportunity is the same thing, the same person. That person being AI. Mm-hmm. And if we're looking at where the threat comes in, there is a piece here to say, we don't need to spend as much now on our marketing because we can get AI to do that. Same as we don't need to spend so much on coding because AI can do that. The same we don't need to do to say X or Y or Z. It's like, right, here's all our agents. Our agents are going to be this marching band of people that come in there and do that. And we've heard Martin Sorrell talking about some of the pressures which are coming in through there. I think this is exactly the same as the sort of massive surge to outsourcing that we've seen in offshoring technology, where people suddenly realise there's a massive drop in quality and we've got to come back to what we were doing and reshore, etc. Yeah. In my view, this sort of, if people are sat there and they're realising AI is the way, or thinking AI is the way forward to marketing and to PR your business, all of a sudden you're realising that you're, coming back to your buyers, they're very aware when they're being spoken to by a human and not. Yeah. And by the same rationale, from a marketing and PR perspective, the ability to utilise AI and augment the human aspect of it all makes it that much better as an industry, and that much more productive around what you're doing, and that much more valuable at the same sort of time, and being able to sort of add at pace and add increased value with more relevance to what we're talking about. So AI is a word that doesn't exist. Doesn't not exist in any of the episodes I've done over the last couple of years, but I really love it to looking at it from your world and how that sort of comes into it. So, as a one worder, AI discuss.
Well, like you said, AI is part of everything. We're talking about it as Hotwire as an AI agency. We're really looking at different tools about how we can help our clients in terms of research, or how are people using AI tools to search for our clients, etc., for news, for updates, etc. So it's about how we use AI in terms of that, but also how do we use AI in the comms and marketing function. So we want to get rid of those small tasks, but I think it's then like, what do you then do? What can you add? What's the added value we can do? And I think that's consultative. It's really understanding how AI can be really valuable. And for some of our clients, they're using AI in different forms. I said sometimes the challenge, if clients have a smaller budget, is they're using AI to create content, which is obviously super fast, and you can put so much in, messages in there, but does it have the right point of view? Is there emotion? Is there something behind it? And the other thing that we've talked to clients is, if all our clients are using it, and all the fintechs are using it, etc., then are we just going to have this mass of same content out there? Yeah. And it's not, how do you differentiate yourself? And going back to my message saying about, you've got to have really specific content and messaging and the narrative that you're telling people, and suddenly we're all saying the same thing. Yeah. Then I feel like there's going to be a point where we all go, hang on, let's just strip it back again. Like, what is this point of view of the company, of the spokesperson, of the CEO? Yeah. But I think these tools are great, but I think it's using them in the right way. And we say to our team is, use AI for some of those tasks, get a basis for something, but then you have to really interpret what it means. Is this right for your client? Is this right for the industry? AI can't give us that at the moment. Yeah. And I think being around for a long time, I know what AI is and what good is, and I can tell and I use AI all the time, but I know if I look at a press release, I can see it's AI because of the structure, or, you know, it's very formalized in certain ways and very formal, and I'm thinking, who talks like that anymore? Sort of. But I think all these tools are really important, but I think what we have to make sure is whatever we're putting out there is authentic, has the personality and the profile of the company. And there is a risk sometimes if we're using AI all the time, do you actually know what is not AI anymore, because you're just pumping out loads of content on AI? It's like, what's been written by anyone else, is that the point of view, or is it AI's told you the point of view and now you're just going along with it? So I think it's, like you said, it's good and bad, and I think everyone's got to be using it. And at Hotwire, like I said, we use it all the time. We're looking at new tools, we're listening to our clients and prospects. How can we develop different things, whether it's to monitor the news, whether it's to cut out some of those tasks about building a media list, etc. But it's making sure that we've got us as the consultants to really delve into it and go, what is the value that we're adding? Because I think that's what clients are looking for now, especially as budgets are tighter, teams are smaller. You know, they're coming to an agency like Hotwire and they're saying, how can you help us? What do you think? You know, and you can't ask AI, well, you can ask AI, but you might get a different answer. But it's like, Paul, you've seen this before, what's your thoughts on this? They're asking me because of my experience and my expertise, rather than a generated answer.
I think that's incredibly important, and I love, the key word to it is authenticity, because I think, we all know when we're being duped by a non-human to sort of do this, and it's a sort of 3-4 stage process that pops up in your LinkedIn or pops up in your inbox, and it's just like, I've got no interest in replying to this because there's no personalization to it. And I think if you go back all the way through to personalization as a concept, and having the right message arrive at the right person, which makes you feel as important and special as you possibly can and targeted. I read a book many years ago by Clive Humby of Dun Humby, who did Tesco Club Card, and how Tesco Club Card, which is effectively the early stages of data and data personalisation, and everything else in between, wasn't just something there that was a generic. Why did other loyalty points not work to the same degree, and why did it catapult Tesco to the world, to the biggest grocer in the country by a country mile from way back before it? Was they were delivering personalised offers at the right time to the right people based off data that came through to them. And I think if we can look at that and say, right, how can AI and ML effectively give us the opportunity to get better personalised data, and then really think about, from the experience piece you're talking about giving a personalised real message with authenticity behind it, that's thought through from the research you're able to do at a higher level than we've ever been able to do before, with better information, with better value, and that combination of expertise and coming through, everything coming through from that. And if we go back to you and your value coming through from productivity, efficiency, and everything else around that sort of stuff, a strong comms, marketing and PR strategy is all about increasing the productivity of that business. So if we're saying, right, you mentioned the pressures around cost, etc., and budgets. If our budgets are getting smaller, then keep on cutting them. That only gives us so much more gain. We can't take our cost base that much lower to increase the profitability of it all. But what we can have influence on is how much more we're able to sell and how much more we can get out of there. And if you've got the right, as we say, that link between marketing and sales that comes together, and we've got this machine that allows you to be that much stronger in terms of everything you're doing, that allows you to be there, I think that to me is just so fundamentally obvious. That actually it's one of the most important spends that you can make to then push yourself further forward, because there's only so many things you can do to increase the flow of customers to your business, and that's going to be the game changer, and that's going to be the winner for you. Cut by all means, be responsible by all means, but realistically look at where your top line is and how you can turn that further forward, and this has got to be part of that as well.
Definitely.
I could talk about this forever, but I want to go on to some practical stuff that you'd be sat there and advising people. So if they are going on their a growth phase, they're going into new geographies, new regions, they're launching new products, all of these exciting, cool things. They've maybe got some funding, they're ready for the next phase of their business. What are some of the steps that you'd be telling people to think about, to do, to interact and from your perspective, think about X and Y and Z, the top tips that you give in that sort of...
I think it's firstly, like I said before, understand the audience, who you're targeting, what are you trying to sell to them. I think is understand what the changes in the markets And then I think have very clear objectives.
Yeah.
What do you want to achieve from a business perspective and a comms perspective? And make sure they're aligned and they actually feed into each other.
Yeah.
Try not to be too far apart, But then I think it's about how you develop that strategy and making sure that, again, there's the ability to change and adapt. I think making sure you've got the right message.
Yeah.
Like I said, what is your USP? What are you telling the audience out there? And thinking about the other areas, how do you become a thought leader? Making sure you've got the right spokespeople, making sure they're trained in the right way, they're on point in talking about the business, the industry and their products, etc. But then also thinking about, in a world that's changing all the time, thinking about their reputational risks, the crisis that's happening out there it's bound to happen, just plan for it, making sure you've got a plan in place of how to respond, because it might not even be your business or your industry, it might be a customer, a client, a partner that that's done something that you need to think about that will affect your brand as a whole. So it's always thinking about that. And I think really just making sure that it's consistency across all of your different channels. Marketing, PR, this should all come together. Everything should be working as one. And I think that's really important. And the last thing is probably just making sure that you're always reviewing it, checking, and reviewing everything to make sure it's working. If it's not working, change it. And at Hotwire, we're very good at being very transparent. If something's not working, managing expectations, we can adapt, we can change. And I think that's the most important thing in an ever-changing market, is making sure that you change with it.
100% agree. There's a couple of things you mentioned in there that I wanted to dive into, which is the whole concept of the USP. I think is a really interesting concept. I've been in the recruitment industry, which is in the UK, a 40,000 agency industry. And the whole concept of a USP, I think, is something that people talk about a lot. And I don't think there are an awful lot of USPs that companies generally come up with. And we've spent a lot of time looking at that. I think we've got some fairly strong elements of what that can look like. But I also think then about companies who are in the SaaS space, for example, within the FinTech world, and actually coming up with something which is called a unique selling point isn't necessarily unique. So for you, when you're advising companies to come up with their USP and working with them to create and find that USP, what are some of the things that you think are genuinely afford people to utilise that moniker?
Yeah, I think it's tricky, like you said. Very few people have a very unique approach to anything, and I think it's really testing the waters. I think it's getting under the skin of the company and understanding what they're trying to achieve. What is the problem? Really delve into the problem that they're trying to solve and how they're solving it. And then it's really looking at what is the proof that they're solving that problem. And I think, we hate all those, next gen, some of the wording, it's not correct. It's sort of like one of the leading, it's sort of like, what are you actually doing? And as our role as communicators and consultants is to really, delve into that and go, okay, you say you're one of the best. Why are you one of the best? Leading technology. What does that mean? Leading cutting edge technology. What does that mean?
Bleeding edge.
Is all this? Oh, you're innovating. Show me how. So we make sure there's sort of a proof point for everything. And then if there is, then having a stat or a, like we said earlier, if you're saying you're saving costs for these companies, how are you showing that? How are you proving that? If you're increasing revenue for them, how are you doing that? So really kicking those tires to make sure that we've got a good story. And it might not be the unique story, but then it's like how we add more colour, more flavour to it. And that could be the founder story. How did he or she come to get this company started? It could be the team they've employed. It could be the markets they're in, the research they've done, etc. So there's different ways, but I think it's and the thing is, we've got to believe in it, and if they can't sell it to us as communicators, then we've got an issue, And so I think it's just, and sometimes it's testing, and like I said, it could change. Where you were a year ago, and then suddenly, like, your customer wants things, they demand things very quickly, suddenly you've got to adapt your messaging to that. So I think it's just making sure you've got a good story, you tell it in a good way, and making sure that you get all those proof points, stats to back up the story.
Absolutely agree. And I think that sort of concept there of making sure that you are. One of the things I think is used less than it should be is the power of a case study. And when you're talking about those proof points, a really well put together case study, I think, makes it a really compelling piece to do it. And people splutter around that a little bit and give a piece of paper or something there. I think when you've got it really well as a story of taking people through that journey and proving it, proofing it alongside that, trust is an important part of it. And you mentioned as well a thought leader. I always tie thought leadership to trusted advisory, et cetera, et cetera. If you're thinking about how someone can become a thought leader in a space, what advice would you give to someone doing that?
Is to have a point of view. To, first of all, understand the industry.
And does that point of view have to be? I think sometimes I always think about the sort of shock jock, Howard Stern type thing to sort of come into it, where people have to have a dissenting voice or an outlandish voice to be someone there who people listen to.
I think no. I mean, I think it varies. I think if you've got a company and you are looking for funding or anything else, you don't want to be too strong one way. And we don't tell our clients to be controversial for the sake of it, because then again, that doesn't work out, and there's always that risk involved now, because there's so much media and everyone's consuming it in different ways. I think it's really important to know what you're saying. And I think thought leader is branded around, but it's someone who actually understands the industry and can talk about it at a very high level, and can talk about how their problem or their their product is solving a problem, and how they're helping their clients. And then it's looking at what is happening in the market and what is their view on that. And there'll obviously be a company view, but if you've been in the industry for 20 years, what's your view? How is this regulation going to change? How does that compare to the last piece of regulation? How have you seen the changes in UK versus the US? And I think it's just making sure that you've got something good to say and something of interest. If it is slightly controversial, that can obviously help as well. But I don't want you to be controversial for the sake of it. It's more like, what is your viewpoint on this? Sometimes we have clients, and spokespeople who have a very strong opinion on something, but it could be risky for the company. So then obviously they have to tailor that. And I think a good spokesperson is able
to know where.
If they're talking to an investor, if they're talking at an event, if they're talking to a journalist, is to know how to adapt that message and that point of view
without completely sitting on the fence at the same time.
Exactly, because there's nothing worse if they go to an event and they just agree with everybody else, and you're just like, that's pointless. But I love it when people go into an event and they say, these are my views, not the views of the company, and you sort of go, the reason you're on the panel is because you're from the company. And that's why you're there. And when people say it's not my views, you sort of think, but your name badge basically says your company, and on the agenda and on the website it says the company. So whatever you say is associated with that company. So even though some people caveat that, it's not a good idea. It's not advisable. So it's your point of view, but you're part of a company. You're there. You're not an independent person on that panel.
And I think it comes all the way back down to where we started off, and this whole concept of going back to the Disney Pixar piece of the heaven and hell. I think the journey, the view or the job of the people of the company is effectively to say, look, if you go down this route, this is the problem that you're facing, and really emphasise the issues of that particular problem, and then create the vision of heaven. And this is how we help, as the expert, as the consigliere, as the sort of Yoda of the scenario, to take you on that sort of that guide to where that piece comes through. And I think it's a really clear story when you think of it like that, and how you're pitching your business and how you take people on that sort of journey, and what the responsibility of each person is. And the bit which you said at the start, which was going to people and really understanding their problems, understanding what they thought, and doing that research, which people don't do enough of, to say, look, what are you actually struggling with? And I think if you were to get everyone to go out to their customers and say, right, let's speak to 5 customers, 5 people who aren't customers yet that we'd like to be, and say, what's concerning you, what's your problems there? When you come back to the persona of that person, when you were talking about ages and all that sort of stuff beforehand, likes, interests, where they hang out, where they listen, where they create their content or get their content or what have you, and you found all that information, but you also found out what's keeping them up at night and what they're excited about, and you create the narrative around that, it becomes massively compelling in a completely different way, doesn't it?
And I think it's always looking at what's happening in the market, but also looking at your competitors. What are they doing differently? And do you want to follow that path, or do you want to create something on your own?
Absolutely.
How are they using the language, and how are they talking about their products? Is it simplicity? Is it reducing complexity? What are the wording they use? And how do you differ from that to try and get the audience? So sometimes that's a challenge, because obviously there's lots of fintechs doing similar things.
Absolutely.
It's how do you cut through the noise? but it's just making sure you're very clear. But by doing that research up front, you should get a better understanding of where your audience sits and how you target them.
Wonderful. I'm going to finish up with two things. I want you to tell us how people should, who should be getting in touch with you and how they should get in touch with you. And then I'm going to give you the opportunity just to sort of do an elevator pitch of where Hotwire can add value in the space. So the floor is yours, Paul.
Okay, well, you need to get in contact with me. LinkedIn is the best way, Paul Bowhay. Always responds, or by email, paul.bowhay@hotwireglobal.com. Always responding at a lot of events as well, Money 2020, 11FS podcasts. I'm always there. And I would say Hotwire, as a global communication agency, it's been around for 25 years, is really focused on helping and being a strategic partner to these fintechs who are looking to either enter a market, who are looking for, how do they get their message out there? And Hotwire can help them to create that story, that strategy, and help execute on it. And we can help them get that message across, but train them in the process, and make sure that we can help them stand out in a crowded market. But I think we're an agency that want to work with a fintech and be their partner and go through that growth together. And we've got lots of experience of doing that. And I think, but at the same time, we're ready to adapt and be flexible as they're pivoting and changing their strategy as they go.
Fantastic. Well, I'm in. Paul, great to see you.
Brilliant.
Thanks so much for coming in. And thank you all for watching. We will see you soon on the next episode of FinTech Focus TV. Thanks a lot.